The elves are awake, as a taller folk more graceful than the dwarves before them. The dwarves are still much better craftsmen. However, the elves had a unique property of being bound to a tree. If their tree dies, then the elf dies, and if the elf dies, the tree dies. When they're born together, and the elf has to protect their tree. The elves awaken all over the world, but the largest host of them emerges in Alaris Forest, later known as the Cursed Forest. With Nick and these elves, war starts spreading much more than before. The first meeting of an elf and dwarf was in the highlands of the Peak Mountain. These races could not communicate in words per se, however, they could communicate through something deeper. A small dwarvish hunting party came through to the town of Agiors and stayed there while learning their language. They made a book that, if you wrote in dwarvish, it would convert to elvish. They called this book the Stone Book. It's still treasured among the dwarves to this day. There was a great friendship between these two races. The elven king of that land was Trota. Trota was invited into the dwarvish cities. The king was awestruck at the grandeur of the city. The elves traded with the dwarves. The dwarves gained knowledge from the elves of better farming, how to leaven bread, and grow plants for eating and medicinal purposes. The elves gained knowledge of metalworking, mining, and sailing. This trade happened all throughout the first half of this age. This marked a golden age between the two races. However, one elf named Elosa was a master crafter and sorcerer. However, she was growing older. Since she had visited the dwarf holes many times for crafting, she knew that the dwarves have never aged. She was jealous of their long lives. She tried to think of many ways to eliminate this factor. Elosa went all to Alaris Forest. Elosa walked around and pondered the question. Elosa eventually thought of an idea. She was going to make a magical object to keep them alive. This object was going to draw strength from the large force, keeping them alive. She knew she could not do this alone. Her first thought was the dwarves. They would not do anything for free. So Elosa turned to her king, King Eglor. So she went to her king's halls, pitched the idea. The king was dismayed, and thought this island idea was unnatural. However, Elosa continued to find help. Eventually, she came across a group of 15 elven smiths who would help her. In return, they would each grant immortality, as she would. So she devised an object to do so. A giant sword would be thrust into the ground and would draw from the strength of other objects connected to it. So they started working on crafting the sword. The sword was forged and made enchanted. It was named Lysura. Lysura's blade was about 10 feet long. Along with the blade, they crafted small golden bracelets inlaid with quartz. With quartz, that would help transfer the power of Elosa, and they would each be rejuvenated and live forever. They found an empty spot and thrust the sword in. Elosa brought the idea to the king, but the king was dismayed, and the king forced her to move away, since it was so evil. The blade started to influence her for dark magic. Eventually, Elosa turned on her fellow elves and started a riot. Dark magic made her powerful enough, even among the angels. Magic created an army of many evil things, of mutants and monsters. The elves and dwarves quickly mobilized against this threat. The dwarves joined the elven forces, and they stood against the evil forces. The battle was long and fierce. However, they ultimately won, and Elosa was killed. However, many elves and dwarves died, and the Golden Age continued for many more years. However, trade ended between the dwarves and the elves. It stopped due to two main reasons. The first, lesser reason, is that the elves were becoming more experienced in knowledge of crafts and no longer needed the dwarves and goods as much. This quickly ended due to the second greater reason, which is the Rhiannon, because they cause much turmoil and spite. The Rhiannon are an order of angels found under Xeris. There were 11 of them. Each group had their own desires instead of the one and harmony. Like the other Magi they want to rule the world themselves. They sent great winds, tsunamis, tornadoes, earthquakes, and more. Their hope was to diminish or wipe out some races. It was mostly successful. It destroyed a large part of the Elvish forest and cities. It demolished and knocked over the mountains, destroying the Dwarvish cities built next to them. It also caused fort cities to crumble. The dwarves were forced deep into their mountains. This caused them to be isolated from the world many years till the Raynam were slain. The world at this time was very chaotic. The chaos of each of the colonies of the dwarves broke away, becoming isolated. The elven realms shrunk and also became independent. The island of Sarone and the west coast of Plariot became a desert. For another millennia, the realms shrank and diminished. This prompted Hama to reckon his ways, the humans. The